Sonic the Hedgehog isn't a bad franchise. The series has never really suffered from a lack of ideas. Across its history, Sonic games have introduced strong mechanics, unique gameplay styles, and ambitious design shifts. At multiple points, the series has even found formulas that clearly work. And yet, despite those successes, Sonic has remained largely inconsistent. Not because the franchise fails outright, but because it rarely builds on what it gets right, specifically in the 3D line of games. Instead of refining its best ideas over time, the series tends to abandon them in favor of reinvention. This pattern has defined Sonic for over 2 decades and explains why progress often feels temporary. And again, this isn't just a one-time thing, it's a constant cycle of inconsistency. Let me show you and you'll begin to see the patterns. Starting off with Sonic Adventure, it established the first real 3D identity for Sonic. Its design emphasized momentum and physics driven through movement. Each character had their own gameplay styles, objectives, and their own version of the overarching story. Even with its rough edges, it provided a strong foundation. Sonic Adventure 2 refined that approach. Level design became more focused, mechanics were more responsive, and the overall pacing improved. The gameplay styles were cut from 4 to 3, Amy's chasing and Tails' racing were just derivatives of Sonic's base gameplay. And the story told was a lot more serious than what came before, with 2 stories to play through that crossed over sporadically. While it removed the adventure fields, the flow of the game's story was streamlined, and the focus on level design demonstrated clear progression from the first game. At this point, the series had a workable structure for 3D Sonic gameplay. However, instead of continuing to refine it, the direction shifted. Sonic Heroes replaced the established formula with team-based mechanics. While innovative, it reduced precision and altered the feel of movement. While it could technically be considered adventure-free, the overall design and classic game influence made it stand out from its former adventure days. Shadow the Hedgehog further diverged, introducing combat-heavy gameplay and branching mission structures that disrupted the flow central to earlier titles. Unique in its own way, the tone and visuals were a far cry from Sonic Heroes. Then came Sonic the Hedgehog in 2006, which attempted to return to the adventure-style design with hub worlds, multiple campaigns, and an RPG element with item stores. But Sonic 06 suffered from technical and structural issues. None of the charm, pacing, or how the previous games played were present in this next-gen title. More importantly, the biggest problem wasn't just that this game failed, it shattered how fans and critics viewed the series. From this point, the adventure style of game design was all but abandoned. But Sonic Team wasn't done, they bounced back with a new direction. Sonic Unleashed introduced the boost formula, marking a major shift from its design philosophy. In the daytime stages, speed became more immediate and visually driven. The gameplay focused on reaction time, lane switching, and memorization rather than momentum building. However, the Werehog stages interrupted that pacing and introduced a slower combat-focused system that contrasted sharply with the high-speed gameplay. I personally never had an issue with the Werehog, but the game tended to favor the Werehog more in terms of design, with a level-up system and slower pacing meant more time was spent battling against Gaia Spawn than blasting through badniks with Sonic speed. Despite this, the core boost mechanics showed potential, and that potential was explored further in Sonic Colors. Colors refined the boost system in several ways. Boost became more limited, encouraging resource management. Level design was more controlled and readable, and the Wisps introduced new mechanics that complemented movement rather than replacing it. However, these improvements came with trade-offs. Colors leaned heavily into 2D sections and simplified the level structure. While this made the game more consistent, it reduced complexity and lowered the overall skill ceiling compared to Unleash's best moments. Then came the peak refinement of the boost formula, Sonic Generations. This game represents the most complete version of that boost formula. It successfully combines the speed and spectacle of Unleashed and the tighter structure and clarity of Colors. Level design in Generations is layered and deliberate, offering multiple paths and rewarding player mastery. The transitions between 2D and 3D are more integrated, and the overall experience avoids pacing issues seen in earlier titles. Most importantly, Generations focused entirely on refining existing mechanics rather than introducing disruptive new systems. This makes it one of the most polished Sonic games, but also highlights a recurring issue: the lack of follow-through. Rather than building on Generations, the series shifted direction again. Sonic Lost World introduced new movement systems, including parkour mechanics and the cylindrical level design. These changes altered the core feel of Sonic's movement and reduced the emphasis on speed. While it gave you more control over a run button, the parkour gimmick was rather finicky at times, and the return of wisps with new colors made what seemed to be a new step in platforming an unnecessary step back. So with this new failure came a new direction: Sonic Boom. While a major deviation from what we know about Sonic, it was intended to bring in a new era for Sonic, with a more Western influence as well as having a new sub-series. More exploration, combat, multiple characters. Ambitious, but this new version of Sonic did not last, and for all intents and purposes was dead on arrival. Sonic Boom Shattered Crystal had more promise, and it tried it again with Fire and Ice, but this was a sinking ship, so Boom was abandoned. Therefore, Sonic Forces was the attempt to return to the boost formula, but no way near the peak that was Generations or even Unleashed for that matter. Everything was made more simpler. Shorter levels, increased automation, reduced player control, and the return of classic Sonic that had no real impact on the game's darker narrative. As a result, Forces feels less engaging, not because of the concept is flawed, but because it lacks the depth and refinement. At best, the Avatar creator had a lot of thought put into it, even if some options were very limiting, as well as its stages being more explorative than modern or classic Sonic with the use of specific wisp-ons. So with this new failure came a new direction. Sonic Frontiers brought a major shift to the overall design of 3D games. Its open zone design allowed for greater player freedom and introduced a more exploratory approach to movement. For the first time in years, players had more control over how to navigate the environment. However, Frontiers was not fully cohesive. Movement physics can feel disconnected from terrain, the open zone gameplay and cyberspace gameplay feel separated rather than unified, and the boost gameplay still exists, but not as practical as before. What was a turning point was a story that focused more on character interactions and world building than any game that came before. Frontiers introduced meaningful ideas, but like many Sonic games before it, it stopped short of fully integrating them. The updates added later made the game feel more polished, but there was still room for improvement. Now we're on to the most recent entry, and instead of reinvention, Shadow Generation suggested a more promising direction. Rather than introducing an entirely new system, it builds on existing ones. Open zone elements are more closely tied to structured level design, the boost gameplay was integrated rather than isolated, and Shadow's new abilities enhanced traversal and combat without disrupting the flow. This approach represents a shift from reinvention to integration, combining ideas instead of just replacing them. In conclusion, Sonic's inconsistency is not the result of failure alone. It comes from a pattern of abandoning ideas before they can fully develop. As you just witnessed, the series has repeatedly demonstrated that it can produce strong gameplay systems. The momentum-based design of Adventure, the speed-focused boost formula, and the exploratory structure of Frontiers. The issue is that these systems are rarely allowed to evolve over time, 2 or 3 entries at best. If Sonic is to become more consistent, the focus needs to shift from constant reinvention to long-term refinement. The foundation for a strong, unified formula already exists. The challenge is whether Sega is willing to build on it.